region will likely be in turmoil. Hamas, amidst that turmoil, will still be there. The state of Israel will still be there. And also, so will groups to the right of this Israeli government, and so will groups to the right of Hamas. It will be a region that is horrendous for the US to try to deal with. Thanks.
Thank you for that very interesting analysis. There are many interesting and provocative points put forward, and we only have about 15, 20 minutes left, so I'll open the floor to questions. Can you please state your name and affiliation? And for those of you in overflow rooms, we have interns who can write down your questions and bring them to the front. We have a man here in the...
Charles Butterworth from the University of Maryland. Thank you very much for an excellent speech, Helena. That was very good. And I liked especially your forcefulness. You were silent about two things, I thought, and I'd like to ask you about them. One is the AIP, the Arab Peace Initiative, where that fits in, why everybody else is so silent about it. And secondly, why nothing about Ahmad Yusuf in Hamas? Would you say anything about him?
About the Arab Peace Initiative, clearly it's a central part of the diplomacy and should be treated as such and recognized as such. The structure of this, as I have long described it, is that you have a tiny, very vulnerable, threatened Palestinian community that is surrounded and enclosed and threatened by Israel, and Israel itself is surrounded and threatened by the Arab world. So if you're going to build enough confidence, getting the Arab dimension into that can potentially give the Israelis enough confidence that they can make the concessions necessary to the Palestinians. And in the context, for example, of arms control agreements that Israel currently has with Egypt and Jordan, and could have with Syria, would have if there were a peace agreement, and Lebanon, then what is the point of hanging on to the heights of the West Bank? I mean, there are very concrete ways in which the Arab state's position can allow Israel to let go of territory. So yes, it needs to be front and center. Of course, Arab diplomats themselves say that what we are promising, and it's there in the text, is that in the event of the peace, the Israeli-Palestinian peace on this basis, return to the 67 lines, East Jerusalem, what's their exact term about the refugee, a just resolution of the refugee issue, then they will they will offer peaceful and normal relations with Israel. What they resent is being asked to make those gestures up front. As one Arab diplomat said to me, the deal is land for peace, the deal is not peace for land for peace. So that's why you don't see very much happening in terms of Arab confidence-building measures, remembering that they also gave lots of confidence-building measures back at the time of Oslo that did not result in reaching the final peace agreement. So there's a long history there. About Ahmad Yusuf, I could speak a little bit about the internal questions inside Hamas. I don't know that much about it. I mean, what I know is what Hamas principals tell me. And evidently there is a lot that happens, for example, with the Hamas prisoners that one can discern, that they have been at the forefront of the negotiations with the Fatah prisoners, obviously over the prisoners' document in 2006, and that they come out quite frequently when they are allowed out, remembering that there are elected parliamentarians, many of them who have been in jail continuously for more than 3 years at this point in Israeli jails. When they are let out, sometimes they come out with interesting proposals. So there's definitely intellectual exchange within Hamas. when I talk about it being an organization of great internal coherence and discipline, I don't mean that they don't discuss ideas. There are different people who bring different ideas, but once they reach a decision, they are disciplined in lining up behind it.
Lyndon Boulding. Hi, Helena. Thank you very much for a wonderful tour d'horizon of this problem. I have many questions in my mind, but I'd like just to say that I endorse all that you said about Hamas. You're talking about they're shaking hands with you. Another symbol that I went to see one of the Hamas leaders. At the time, he had been elevated to be foreign minister. I arrived at his office. I was told to wait. He would be out to see me. His assistant came out, a very chicly dressed woman with her hair uncovered. This was the assistant to the foreign minister of the Hamas. I said, what's going on here? This has shocked me. Well, in any case, the question, though, that I really is troubled with is this, and I'm embarrassing myself to even raise it. What makes any of us think that the Israelis are serious about negotiating a peace? What have they got to gain by negotiating? They have a lot to gain by a process. Clearly, all of us who know the area well know that the Israelis are thoroughly committed to the peace process. This can go on for years. But I think to me it's very clear by now that with the conditions on the ground in the West Bank, the impossibility of changing those things drastically as it would have to be, is there any reason to think that the Israelis that is the inner establishment. There's no question. The majority of the Israeli public, like the majority of the Palestinian public, want peace. They're sick of this. But the inner circle of the establishment in Israel, it seems to be very clearly, does not want peace. They don't want to negotiate peace. They were willing to go through a process. And what is wrong about that analysis?
I think you're right to stress that all the opinion polls show that amongst the publics on both sides, there remains majority support, even though it's waning somewhat, for the two-state outcome. And I think the U.S. president needs to build on that and to speak wherever possible to those Israelis and those Palestinians, not just to the leaders. I think you're right that the incentive structure for Israeli political leaders to actually reach a peace agreement has not been there. First of all, because of this whole notion that, we, the mediator, can't want peace more than the parties. And secondly, during the First Intifada and the whole lead up to the First Intifada, there was a very strong financial incentive on the Israelis to start to think about withdrawing from the West Bank because the occupation was costing them a lot of money. Just administering the occupation was very expensive, just as in the 1980s, administering the occupation of half of Lebanon almost ruined the Israeli economy in the mid-1980s when they had that horrendous inflation. Then they got Oslo. What happened with Oslo? The entire cost of administering the occupation was offloaded to the Europeans. And the Europeans have been funding the interim Palestinian administration. Israel doesn't have to pay a cent. That removed a huge reason for Israeli voters to think, oh, we really need to end the occupation. From their point of view, they've ended the occupation in terms of having to pay for it on a daily and continuing basis. I think we need to really look at incentives. I mean, that's why I'm talking about all the levers of U.S. national power. That has to include, the very generous financial, military, and political support, access to the discount window at the Fed for Israeli banks. I mean, economic benefits that no other country gets. And why should we do this if they are pursuing policies that go against our national interest? I just think that our president needs to get very serious about that if he wants to carry on being in a position of leadership in the region.
Great. I'm going to combine three questions here from the other room. From your viewpoint, what's the reason that Saudi doesn't try to have a Mecca agreement? Again, question question one. Two, what do you think about Turkish mediation for the Hamas-Fatah disagreement? And three, what do you think Abbas should do at this point? Do you believe that he'll lose